3 weeks before my wedding, someone sent my fiancé a screenshot that made it look like I was cheating on him. It was fake. I could prove it was fake. But that wasn't even the real plan. The real plan had been in motion for almost a year quietly, patiently orchestrated by the one person at that wedding who was supposed to be welcoming me into the family. She wasn't trying to stop the wedding because she thought I was wrong for her son. She was trying to stop it because she already had someone else in mind for that seat beside him. I just wasn't supposed to find out until it was too late to do anything about it. She was wrong about that too. My name is Emily, I'm 29. I work in marketing for a healthcare company, and until last spring, I would have described my life as genuinely good. Not perfect, nobody's is, but good in the way that makes you a little superstitious about saying it out loud. I'd been with Daniel for 4 years. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue, and within 6 months I knew he was the kind of person I wanted to build an actual life with, steady, funny in a dry way that took people a minute to catch on to. Endlessly patient with my terrible parallel parking. He proposed on a hiking trail we'd done a dozen times before. Nothing over the top, just us and a ring and a view we both loved. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. Daniel's family runs an event and catering business that's been around for almost 30 years, the kind of company that does weddings, corporate galas, milestone anniversaries, the whole circuit in our region. His mother, Diane, built most of it from the ground up after his father passed when Daniel was a teenager. I respected that about her, genuinely. She was sharp, tireless, exactly the kind of woman people describe as a force. Daniel worked for the company too, managing the operations side, with the unspoken understanding that he'd eventually take over more of it. Diane and I got along fine on the surface. Polite dinners, appropriate holiday gifts. The kind of relationship where nothing was openly wrong, but nothing ever felt quite warm either. It took me longer than it should have to notice the pattern underneath it, the way she'd casually mention Daniel's ex-girlfriend, Claire, in conversations that had nothing to do with her. The way she'd bring up how Claire really understood the business side of things, or how Claire's family and ours go back so far. Claire and Daniel had dated for 2 years before me, ending on what he always described as mutual and mostly amicable terms. Claire's family, as it turned out, also happened to run a chain of upscale event venues, the kind of business that would pair extremely well with a catering company looking to expand. I didn't think much of any of this at first. Exes come up. Family business talk comes up. I told myself I was reading too much into offhand comments. When Daniel proposed, Diane's reaction was warm enough on the surface, a hug, a congratulations, sweetheart, a bottle of champagne she'd clearly had chilling for a while, which in hindsight felt less like joy and more like readiness for whatever outcome landed in front of her. But almost immediately, she inserted herself into the wedding planning in a way that felt less like excitement and more like control. "You'll want Vanessa," she told me within the first week, referring to a wedding planner who'd worked with the family business for over a decade. "She knows exactly how we do things. It'll save you so much stress." I agreed because it seemed reasonable, and because Daniel encouraged it too. "Vanessa's basically family," he said. "She'll take such good care of you." I had no reason yet to think that being basically family meant her loyalty ran in a direction that wasn't mine. For the first few months, everything moved the way weddings are supposed to move. Venue booked a property that notably belonged to a business partner of Diane's, though I didn't clock the significance of that at the time. Dress fittings scheduled, save the dates sent. My mother, who lives 2 states away and has never been the type to hover, flew in twice just to help stuff envelopes and cry happy tears over swatches with me. It was somewhere around month 5, as the guest list started firming up, that the first real cracks appeared. Small ones, The kind you explain away one at a time, right up until you can't anymore. The guest list was the first thing. I'd sent Vanessa a list of about 40 names on my side close family, college friends, a handful of coworkers I was genuinely close with. When the final version came back for my approval, 6 of my names were gone, including 2 cousins I'd specifically asked about, both quietly cut for what Vanessa called space constraints, given the final head count. I brought it up with Diane directly, since she was covering a significant portion of the venue cost as part of the family's contribution. Weddings are always a balancing act, she said, in that smooth, unbothered tone she used whenever she wanted a conversation to end. We had to make room for some important names on our side. Business relationships, mostly. You understand how that goes. I didn't push it much further at the time. It felt petty to fight over a guest list when so much else was going right. In hindsight, I think that's exactly the read she had on me. Someone who'd rather swallow a small insult than start a bigger fight. She wasn't wrong about that. Not yet. Then came the prenup. I want to be clear, I wasn't against a prenup on principle. Given the family business, it made sense, and I told Daniel as much when he first brought it up. A little sheepishly, clearly relaying a conversation that hadn't been his idea. What surprised me was the document itself. When it finally arrived from the family's longtime attorney, Dent's, one-sided, structured in a way that would have kept virtually everything, including any future earnings tied to the business, entirely separate and entirely controlled by a family trust that I had no visibility into and no role in. Diane had specifically suggested I use the same attorney to keep things simple and avoid unnecessary costs, rather than getting my own representation. I didn't take that suggestion. I hired my own lawyer, a friend of a friend named Priya, sharp and unimpressed by intimidating paperwork, who took one look at the draft and told me, flatly, "This isn't a prenup. This is a blueprint for making sure you walk away with nothing, no matter how long the marriage lasts." We pushed back. Diane's team eventually agreed to revisions, though the process left a strange taste in my mouth that never fully went away. Around this time, Claire started resurfacing. Not dramatically, nothing you could point to and call inappropriate on its own. She'd been invited to the engagement dinner, which Diane framed as she's practically part of the family. Her parents and I do so much business together. It would have been strange to leave her out. She showed up looking effortlessly put together, warm and friendly toward me in a way that felt almost performed, and spent a noticeable amount of time in conversation with Daniel about the old days and mutual friends. Daniel didn't seem to think anything of it. To be fair to him at the time, neither did I. Not really. It's easy to see a pattern clearly in hindsight and forget how reasonable each individual piece looked in the moment. Then the vendor issues started. 2 deposits I'd personally paid for the florist, and for a photographer I'd fought hard to book, since he was in high demand, came back as failed transactions. Both vendors contacted me, confused, saying the payments had bounced on their end, despite clearing on mine. When I called my bank, there was no explanation. The transfers had simply been redirected, reversed, then reprocessed days later, conveniently after both vendors had already given the dates to other clients. I had to scramble to find replacements at higher cost with far less lead time. Vanessa's explanation was vague. Banking issues happen sometimes with vendor transfers. It's more common than you'd think. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something about the specific timing, right after I'd pushed back hard on the guest list and the prenup, sat wrong with me in a way I couldn't quite articulate yet. The moment everything actually cracked open happened 3 weeks before the wedding. Daniel called me on a Tuesday night, his voice tight in a way I'd rarely heard from him. He asked if he could come over, When he arrived, he was holding his phone like it was something that had physically hurt him, and he showed me a screenshot, supposedly a text conversation between me and a coworker named Marcus, someone I worked with occasionally on cross-department projects. The messages were suggestive, casual in a way that implied familiarity that simply didn't exist between me and Marcus. Can't wait for Thursday. Don't mention it to D. One line read, time-stamped from what looked like my phone number. I felt something go cold and very still in my chest. Daniel, I've had maybe 4 conversations with Marcus in my life. All of them in a group Slack channel about a project deadline. I don't even have his personal number. Where did this come from? It came from a number I didn't recognize. He said, anonymous. It just said, thought you should see this before the wedding. I asked him, as calmly as I could manage while my hands were shaking, to check the actual timestamp on the screenshot against my real phone activity. Thursday of that week, the day referenced in the fake message, I'd been in an all-day training session with 11 coworkers, badge access logged, a group lunch photo posted in our team channel with a timestamp that put me nowhere near wherever this supposed rendezvous was implied to be. I showed him everything. I could see him wanting to believe me, and also, underneath that, a flicker of doubt that someone had clearly worked very hard to plant. He didn't call off the wedding that night. But something had shifted, and we both knew it. I didn't sleep much that week, partly from stress, partly because something about the screenshot kept nagging at me. The phrasing was slightly off. The kind of thing someone writes when they're imitating a text conversation rather than actually having one. My best friend, Nora, who'd been my roommate in college and has an almost unsettling talent for noticing small inconsistencies, offered to help me dig into it properly. We started with the basics. The number the screenshot came from was unlisted, unsaved, clearly not a real ongoing contact, the kind of number you get from a burner app or a prepaid SIM used once and discarded. Nora, who works in IT support and knows more about digital forensics than any reasonable person should from a hobby interest, pointed out that the message bubble styling in the screenshot didn't quite match the current version of the messaging app. I actually used a small, easy-to-miss detail, but a real one. Then Nora found something else, almost by accident. She'd stayed loosely in touch with one of Vanessa's junior assistants, a woman named Kayla who'd helped coordinate a few of our vendor calls. Kayla, it turned out, had been uneasy about several things over the past few months, and once Nora gently asked a few pointed questions, opened up more than either of us expected. Kayla told us that Vanessa and Diane spoke almost daily, well beyond what normal wedding planning communication would require. She mentioned overhearing, more than once, conversations about handling the situation before it becomes permanent, and making sure Daniel has a clear head before he signs anything he can't undo. She also mentioned reluctantly, clearly aware of how damning it sounded that she'd been asked to help source a prepaid phone a few weeks earlier, told it was for a vendor coordination issue. An explanation that made no sense to her at the time and made a lot more sense now. She sent us the purchase confirmation email, forwarded from her own inbox, for a prepaid phone plan. The billing name on the account D. Whitmore, Diane's full name. I sat with that for a long moment before I said anything to Nora. Not shock, exactly some part of me. The part that had been quietly cataloging small wrongs for almost a year wasn't entirely surprised. It was more like watching a picture I'd been squinting at finally snap into focus. We kept digging, carefully. Nora pulled together the vendor payment records, showing the exact dates the deposits had bounced, cross-referenced against a separate email thread forwarded, again, by an increasingly guilty Kayla, where Diane had asked Vanessa whether there was a way to create enough friction that the date gets pushed back. Nothing dramatic, just enough time. Enough time, I understood now, to let doubt do the rest of the work. Enough time for Claire, whose family's venue business Diane had been in increasingly serious merger talks with, to remain a comfortable, familiar option in the background. I called Priya, my attorney, mostly because I needed someone with a clear head to tell me I wasn't overreacting. She confirmed I wasn't. She also pointed out, calmly, that depending on how far this had gone, some of what Diane and Vanessa had done, the fabricated messages, specifically could constitute harassment or even a form of fraud, though she was careful to note that wasn't necessarily the road I had to take. You have real leverage here. She said, what you do with it is up to you. I thought about it for 2 days, not about whether to tell Daniel, that was never a question. About how, I decided against confronting Diane directly first. If I went to her, I already knew what I'd get: smooth deflection, plausible deniability, maybe even a counter-narrative designed to make me look paranoid or unstable right before a wedding. So instead, I went to Daniel, alone, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, and I laid out everything in order: the burner phone receipt with his mother's name on it, the vendor payment records, Kayla's account, the mismatched message bubble styling, all of it. I watched him go through something in real time that I can only describe as devastating. Not disbelief, the evidence was too specific, too documented for that. It was worse than disbelief. It was the slow, physical process of understanding that his own mother had spent months working to sabotage the relationship he'd chosen, using tools as ugly as a fake infidelity screenshot, in service of a business arrangement he hadn't even known was actively being negotiated. The merger talks with Claire's family, he said quietly, almost to himself. I thought that was just standard business stuff. I didn't know it was. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. We didn't call off the wedding, but we did agree together that his mother needed to answer for this in a way that couldn't be smoothed over with a practiced apology and a change of subject. The rehearsal dinner was 5 days later, at a private room Diane had booked at one of the venues her business regularly used, full of her closest friends, longtime business associates, extended family, and yes, Claire, seated at a table near the front with her parents, all of them clearly under the impression the merger conversations were still quietly, comfortably ongoing. Daniel asked to say a few words before dinner service began, which wasn't unusual for a rehearsal dinner, so no one thought twice about it. He thanked people for coming, told a warm story about the hiking trail proposal that got a genuine laugh from the room, and then, without raising his voice or making a scene of it, said something that changed the temperature of the entire room. I also want to be honest about something, because I think honesty matters more to me right now than keeping things comfortable. He said, over the last few weeks, some things happened that I didn't understand at the time: a fake text message designed to make me doubt Emily, vendor payments that mysteriously fell through right after we pushed back on some family requests, a guest list that got quietly rearranged without much explanation. I found out this week where all of it actually came from. He didn't shout his mother's name across the room. He didn't need to. Every eye in that room had already found her. Diane's face did something complicated, a flash of genuine shock, quickly replaced by the same smooth composure she'd used all year, the kind built from decades of running a business, where control over a room was second nature to her. Daniel, sweetheart, I don't know what you think you. I have the burner phone receipt with your name on the billing account, Daniel said, still calm, still steady. I have the vendor records. I have someone willing to confirm the conversations about slowing down the wedding on purpose. I'm not doing this to embarrass you in front of everyone. Mom, I'm doing it because I need everyone in this room, including you, to understand that this ends now. I want to be honest about something myself. I didn't say much during that moment. I'd said everything I needed to say to Daniel privately, days earlier. This part wasn't really about me proving anything to a room full of people who barely knew me. It was about Daniel, for the first time in this entire process, choosing to stand fully and visibly on my side, in front of the exact people his mother had spent a year trying to convince otherwise. Claire, to her credit, looked as blindsided as anyone, whatever she'd known or hadn't known about the specifics. Watching it laid out publicly clearly wasn't something she'd signed up for. She quietly excused herself from the table not long after, her parents trailing behind her, visibly uncomfortable with being associated with the scene unfolding in front of their business partners and peers. Diane didn't have a real answer. She tried a few, "This is a misunderstanding." Then, "I was only trying to protect this family." Then, finally, something closer to the truth slipping out under pressure. "You have no idea what building something from nothing takes. Daniel, I wasn't going to watch you hand half of it away to someone who—" She stopped herself. She didn't need to finish that sentence either. Everyone in the room had already heard enough. The dinner didn't end in shouting or dramatics. It ended quietly, awkwardly, guests filtering out earlier than planned, murmured conversations trailing behind them that Diane would spend a long time trying to manage the fallout from. We got married 5 weeks later than originally planned, smaller than the version Diane had been orchestrating, at a different venue entirely, one with absolutely no connection to the family business. My mother walked me halfway down the aisle before handing me off, which had always been the plan, but it felt different this time, lighter somehow, like the day finally belonged only to the people who actually wanted to be there. Daniel stepped back from his day-to-day role at the family business in the months that followed, not a dramatic, door-slamming exit, but a gradual, deliberate distancing, while he figured out what he actually wanted his career to look like outside his mother's control. He started consulting independently for other event companies, using the operational knowledge he'd built over years, just without Diane's name attached to every decision. The merger with Claire's family's venue business never happened, whether that was because of the rehearsal dinner fallout specifically, or simply because trust had evaporated on both sides. I honestly don't know, and I've stopped wondering. Vanessa lost more than one client in the following months, once quiet word got around about what she'd helped orchestrate in an industry built almost entirely on trust and discretion. That kind of reputation doesn't come back easily. Diane and Daniel's relationship isn't what it used to be, and I won't pretend that doesn't complicate things sometimes, especially around holidays. She reached out a few months after the wedding with what I'd call a partial apology, more of an explanation than a real accounting of what she'd done, though Daniel told me it was the closest to genuine reflection he'd ever heard from her. We see her occasionally now, carefully, on terms that are different than before. Boundaries, it turns out, are something you can rebuild a relationship around, even an imperfect one. As for me, I think about that fake screenshot sometimes. Oddly enough, not with anger anymore. Mostly just a strange kind of clarity. It was meant to make me look untrustworthy. Instead, digging into where it actually came from is what exposed everything else. I've never been more grateful for a mistake someone else made. We're coming up on our first anniversary now. The house we bought together has nothing to do with anyone's family business. No strings attached to anyone's approval. Some days it still surprises me how much lighter life feels when the people around you actually want you there, not for what you might contribute to a merger, or a trust, or a decade-old plan involving someone else entirely, but just for you. If you sat through this whole story with me, thank you. Genuinely, this was a longer one, and I appreciate you staying till the end. This channel is built on real stories like Emily's, and I upload a new one every single day. So if this kept you hooked, hit subscribe now so you don't miss what's coming next. And if something like this has ever happened to you, a family member who tried to interfere with your relationship, a wedding that turned into a battlefield, anyone who tried to quietly rearrange your life without your permission, I want to hear it. But I'm not asking you to share it in the comments, because a story like that deserves privacy, not a public thread. Send me a DM on Instagram instead. My handle is in the bio, DeputyFiles01. Tell me as much or as little as you're comfortable sharing. I'll change every detail that could identify you before I ever turn it into a video. And I'll always ask your permission first. Hit subscribe, tap the bell, and I'll see you in tomorrow's story.